Morant with a running start. Elevates. Oh, it dunks. Oh, my goodness.
Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn his heat. It's gone. Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining.
Conley now with three. Count it. A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance.
Adams going long. Morant. He hit it. John Morant. Insanity.
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. My name is Keith Parrish. On today's episode, I will talk a little about some Grizzlies news and then look at the top returning lineup combinations for the Grizzlies this season. Before we get there, a reminder that today's episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FBBF when you sign up. That is FBBF, as in Fast Break Breakfast. And if you use that code, not only will Underdog match your first deposit up to $100, they will also give you a free mystery pick. That offer will be available for the entire NFL season. So head to Underdog Fantasy and try it out and use that promo code FBBF. Okay, we're currently less than 2 weeks from Grizzlies Media Day, and then, of course, training camp. I will be monitoring the media day remotely from Nashville. Unfortunately, it's impossible for me to be in Memphis, but I think as an outsider, I'm going to share a lot of the same questions that you guys have. I think, yes, we all want to know how the small forward battle will shake out in training camp, but I think even bigger and more immediately, we want to find out, one, how healthy Steven Adams is, and two, is Ja Morant allowed to practice and be with the team at all during his suspension? Like, how near can he be? Can he practice behind closed doors with the team? Is it just public stuff he can't do? That part of his banishment still seems a little bit murky. So in less than 2 weeks, we will find out. I think we'll get clarity about some of that important stuff. Now, Ja Morant did just make his first public appearance since the NBA suspended him. He was part of Nike's World Basketball Festival in New York City. He appeared alongside other Nike athletes such as Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and Victor Wembanyama. Ja and Victor acted as coaches together for the basketball portion of the event. So Ja Morant making a public appearance to support his Ja ones and his Nike relationship. Also, Ja Morant, if you haven't seen it, has been releasing these hype videos on social media, part of his redemption tour. He's releasing these short films where he's wearing his shirts that say rebirth, gratitude, accountability, character, and such. I don't know if you like them. I like hype videos when it's like, oh, there's my favorite players playing. This version of it where it's like, oh, he's wearing that rebirth shirt. Oh, well, what's the rebirth from? Oh, from unsavory behaviors? I don't know. It kind of falls flat on me. But check those out as Ja looks to, I guess, clean up his image a little bit and get everybody excited for his eventual return, which, fingers crossed, will be in December. In other fun, I guess, Grizzlies news, Marcus Smart got married recently, and this is a week after Derrick Rose got married. So the two new Grizzlies guards both got married within a week of each other. Congrats to both of them. Derrick Rose's wedding, by the way, was officiated by Joakim Noah. So that's another Grizzlies player there. Of course, they've been friends for forever since being on the Bulls together. And then Joakim himself got married earlier this summer. That wedding was in Brazil, and Derrick Rose was at that wedding. There's a picture of him with a giant camera. So some fun social media stuff about the Grizzlies as everyone seems to be getting their weddings done before the start of the NBA season. Now, In other NBA news, there was a free agent signing that I thought was notable or interesting, sort of in how it relates to the Grizzlies. And that's Kelly Oubre, who might have been the most notable remaining free agent. He agreed to a deal with the Philadelphia 76ers. And like a lot of the guys who free agency passed them by, or the first wave of signings, like they didn't get picked up, there didn't seem to be an obvious landing spot for these guys, and most of them had to settle for minimum deals, and that's what Kelly Oubre took. Kelly Oubre takes a minimum deal to join the Philadelphia 76ers, and this is a guy who scored 20 points per game last year. Yes, his efficiency was very, very poor. Yes, he makes Dillon Brooks look like an amazing, willing passer. Kelly Oubre never passes. So, despite the fact he scored 20 points per game, he obviously was not in demand. I think it's interesting from a Grizzlies angle because of our gaping hole at small forward. Like, would you be interested in Kelly Oubre for nothing? Which is basically what he's signed for. I know Kelly Oubre has been a fun kind of connected piece to the Grizzlies ever since we tried to trade Marshawn Brooks for him. And then the Wizards and Suns thought, wait a minute, we thought it's Dillon Brooks, not Marshawn Brooks. And so there's always been that connection to Kelly Oubre. Of course, Kelly Oubre's basketball career now has been highlighted by the fact that, much like Christian Wood, another guy who signed for the minimum recently, whatever team Kelly Oubre is on, doesn't really care if he comes back. He has been bouncing around the league a lot, despite his ability to score, his athleticism. He's got defensive skills, but for whatever reason, he doesn't hang around. But again, I think it's interesting because it's just a minimum salary, and the Grizzlies had that open roster spot. We went with Derrick Rose, the newly married Derrick Rose. That was our choice for filling our empty roster spot. Who knows? It might work out. He might be the most talented of these guys. But I continue kind of to feel like, what could have been with some other options. Like, maybe none of these players work out that I'm about to list for the teams that sign them. But there are a lot of guys this summer who signed for the minimum. And I would probably rather have all of them than Derrick Rose. But, again, I've already made that opinion. Other people disagree with me. The Grizzlies, of course, disagree with me. The Grizzlies thought Derrick Rose was the best fit for them. But you have all these guys who signed for the minimum to contending teams, or teams I think are at least thought to be as good as the Grizzlies, if not better. And it's interesting, I think, when you look at them all to consider maybe a what might have been, where the Grizzlies, we chose to sign Derrick Rose to 2 years guaranteed on minimum salary. Most of these guys that I'm about to mention signed a 1-year deal with a second-year player option, which is just guarding against disaster or them getting injured, and then they can, opt in. Otherwise, it's like a make-good deal. They hope they can revamp their value and hit free agency next year. But you have Kelly Oubre going to the Sixers on the minimum. You have, like I said, Christian Wood going to the Lakers on the minimum. You have Eric Gordon, of course, going to the Suns on the minimum. Also, Keita Bates-Diop and Yuta Watanabe going to the Suns. You got Josh Richardson going to the Heat. You got Josh Okogie also going to the Suns. Malik Beasley goes to the Bucks on the minimum. Jay Crowder returns to the Bucks. You have Patrick Beverley, who's going to be a new face with Kelly Oubre on the Sixers on the minimum. The Warriors got Corey Joseph and Dario Saric for the minimum. Even like the Nuggets got Justin Holiday on the minimum. And maybe Justin Holiday, he looked a little bit washed up last year. Maybe he's kind of on par with maybe Derrick Rose's current ability. Who knows? But all those names and those teams that I listed, it's the Heat, it's the Suns, it's the Lakers, it's the Sixers, it's the Bucks, it's the Warriors. These are all the best teams adding veteran guys, or sometimes guys who you assumed would get paid more than the minimum, and they're taking flyers on them for free. And I'm honest, I'm jealous of it. I'm jealous of guys. Like, these are guys we've mentioned in fake trades before, like Malik Beasley and Eric Gordon. And the idea that you could try out Kelly Oubre on the minimum, I'm like, I would at least see how it fits. Again, because of just our roster construction. The fact that we have massive question marks at that small forward spot with letting Dillon Brooks walk. Of course, maybe some guy jumps out like Santi Aldama did last year. No one saw Or at least I don't know anybody that saw the Santi Aldama year 2 breakout happening last year. And so maybe there will be a year 2 breakout for LaRavia or David Roddy, or my fingers are crossed for Vince Williams Jr., or a year 3 bounce back / breakout for Zaire Williams. And so that brings me now to looking at some of our returning players and some of the best net rating lineup combinations for guys who are returning. Now, the Grizzlies are bringing back, technically, most of their players. I mean, 15 guys are coming back when you count the two-way players. The only players who played any minutes for the Grizzlies last season who are not returning are Dillon Brooks, Tyus Jones, Danny Green, and Kennedy Chandler. Of course, Danny Green and Kennedy Chandler barely played. Now, because of the heavy minutes played by Dillon Brooks and the heavy minutes played by Tyus Jones, we actually don't have a lot of possessions to look at or evidence to look at about how the Grizzlies will look without either one of those players. Last year, the Grizzlies played 1,000 possessions. That's all, with the returning 15 players. The Grizzlies had a plus 7.2 net rating in those 1,000 possessions. So we don't have a lot of evidence for exactly how the Grizzlies are going to look. Now, of course, that gets exacerbated by the Ja Morant suspension. When you take away Ja Morant now, when you try to find out how many possessions the Grizzlies played last year without Ja Morant, Tyus Jones, or Dillon Brooks on the court, well, now the number gets very, very small. And it goes all the way down to 347 possessions. They were outscored by 8 points per 100 possessions. But again, that number is so small. It's just a weird, useless number. So, we don't know a lot. Frankly, we don't have any idea what the Grizzlies are going to look like the first 25 games. We're hopeful they're going to continue their same regular season success. I think they're going to be good just based on their talent level if we find out Steven Adams is totally healthy. And then with Desmond Bane, with Jaren Jackson Jr., we're all excited about the acquisition of Marcus Smart. The on-court product is going, I think, to be relatively successful while Ja Morant is suspended. But it's a mystery exactly what it's going to look like. So you basically don't even have that much lineup data trying to figure out lineups that only included the guys we have returning. Like 5-man lineups just using the players currently on the roster, or if you want to throw out Brandon Clark and Ja Morant, well then you're left with almost no evidence. But one thing I think positive for the Grizzlies, beyond the very obvious, we have Ja Morant, we have Desmond Bane, we have Jaren Jackson Jr., the Grizzlies are bringing back their top 6 players last year in regular season on-off net rating swing. Of course, on-off net rating swing is volatile, and it always needs to be used with the context of why these numbers mean what they do. But it's fun to look at, and if you rank the guys based on top net rating swing on their on-off net rating swing from last year, top was Jaren, second was Desmond Bane, third was Luke Kennard, fourth was Steven Adams, fifth Ja Morant, sixth John Conchar. Now, one thing that points out how these things can change year to year and are a little bit volatile, just a reminder, Dillon Brooks led the Grizzlies in on-off net rating swing the previous 2 seasons. But also going to the returning players, we know the top part of the Grizzlies roster that's returning is very, very good. And we have very few questions about the top half of the roster. I'd say the top 6-7 players are very, very strong. So I'm including Luke Kennard, along with the presumed starters when healthy, Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, Jaren Jackson Jr., Steven Adams. And a lot of the best 2-man lineup combinations from last year do feature the returning players. So if you look at all 2-man lineup combinations to play a minimum of 200 minutes last regular season for the Grizzlies, 19 of the top 21, based on net rating, feature 2 players who are still on the roster. The only combinations in the top 21 that don't are Dillon Brooks and John Conchar were 8th in 2-man net rating. And then Dillon Brooks and Steven Adams were 12th in 2-man net rating. All the rest of the top 21, feature guys still on the team. Number 1 in net rating for 2-man combinations was Jaren and Santi. Number 2 was Desmond Bane and Luke Kennard. Both those lineup combinations were close to plus 21 net rating. So awesome net rating numbers. Of course, the true shooting percentage when those guys were on the court, extremely high, 64% true shooting percentage. So who knows? I'm going to say likely not sustainable. Number 3 for two-man lineup combination from last year, it was Desmond Bane and Steven Adams. Number 4, Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr. Number 5, Ja Morant, Desmond Bane. Number 6, Ja Morant and Luke Kennard. And then we have Jaren and Steven Adams. And then we hit 8, which is already said, Dylan Brooks, John Conchar. 9, John Conchar, Steven Adams. 10, John Conchar and Ja Morant. So Conchar, he shows up a lot in all of these lineup numbers, lineup combinations. Again, it's always positive when John Conchar plays. Now, if you look at the best 3-man lineups last year, it gets tough when you start filtering out the players who aren't going to be here, at least for the first 25 games. If we exclude Ja Morant and also Brandon Clark because of his injury, then, like I said, because of those, 347 possessions where we have evidence of lineups that don't feature any players who are gone for this year's team, it gets harder to pick out combinations using just players who are still around. But here are right now the best 3-man lineups last year featuring only players who are going to be around for the first 25 games. The best one is Desmond Bane, Santi Aldama, and Steven Adams. They had a plus 20 net rating. And, of course, all of these small sample size. Small sample size. They are, this is a minimum of 150 minutes. So not totally meaningless, but still, like, you need a lot more minutes than that to draw, I think, some firm conclusions. But Bane, Aldama, and Adams is the best returning 3-man. John Conchar, Jaren Jackson Jr., Steven Adams is the next best one, plus 19. Third, Desmond Bane, John Conchar, and Santi Aldama. And if you look at these 3-man lineups, you can kind of figure out, I bet there's one really good 5-man lineup that's probably using Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. and Santi Aldama and John Conchar and Steven Adams. Like that. That's normally how these things, they're interconnected. They are not independent of other lineups. Like the 4th one, guess what? It's John Conchar again. This time with Santi Aldama and Xavier Tillman. They were plus 15 net rating in their minutes. The 5th one is Desmond Bane, John Conchar, Jaren Jackson Jr. Then we have Desmond Bane, David Roddy, Jaren Jackson Jr. 7th is John Conchar plus Santi Aldama with Steven Adams. They have a plus 10 net rating, by the way. And then we get to Desmond Bane plus Jaren Jackson Jr. and Steven Adams. And all of this, I think, just works, again, to the known quantities are the top line players, then plus John Conchar. And it's why maybe DeMichael Cole, when I asked him on the episode last week, like, who would you start or who would you be your 10th man? And we were just like, man, why not Conchar? Like, he fits. Maybe his upside isn't there. Maybe you do want to try out a guy who maybe has more upside, so you would go with a Roddy or a Laravia or a Zaire to see if there's a bigger ceiling. But, like, if you're trying to win the basketball game while Ja Morant's out, you might just be turning to John Conchar once again because he is, he's not Jaren when it comes to, like, a cheat code and net rating, but all Conchar lineups normally work out pretty well. Now, one thing that I think is interesting when you look at 3-man lineup combinations from last year and then the year before, this is a thing or a fact that I think really demonstrates how much there's been changeover on the roster. Despite keeping your main players, despite keeping most of your starters besides Dylan Brooks, there's been massive changeover between the 56-win team of 2021-2022 and this year's team. And I think that's demonstrated when you look at the best 3-man net ratings from the 2021-2022 season. This is the 56-win team that lost in 6 games in the second round to the Warriors. Of the 83 3-man combinations to play at least 150 minutes for the Grizzlies in 2021-2022, the top 27 combinations in net rating all feature a player who's no longer on the team. So, like, this is not the same team it was 2 years ago. The highest ranking combo from that year featuring players who were still on the team, or featuring only players who were still on the team, it's Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Steven Adams. They were 28th in net rating that season with a plus 10 net rating. So it's just something to monitor, and it's something to maybe back me up when I believe I was asked a listener question, like, what's my favorite Grizzlies era? And I said 2 years ago, I think it's a new era. We're already in a new era, basically. I loved that team. And this year's team, it's going to have a different identity, and we're going to find probably different strengths. And we're going to latch on to maybe some new combinations. Like, particularly, I think, like the Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard, like that might be my called shot for the top two-man net rating lineup next year, and maybe in the non-Jaren Jackson Jr. Division, because Jaren remains a net rating cheat code. I also think Luke Kennard and Steven Adams, like, remember, those guys didn't play together last year. The Luke Kennard, Steven Adams might have an unbelievable two-man net rating next season. Of course, Luke Kennard was number 1 on the team in offensive rating, and Steven Adams was number 2 in offensive rating. And that's without playing together. Now, of course, Luke Kennard was number 1 in offensive rating. He was also last in defensive rating. So, a lot of fun when Luke Kennard plays. Also, like, whenever you're looking at these lineup stats, you do have to keep an eye on the shooting percentages and the variable changes of, like, oh, that lineup hit a lot of three-pointers. And, of course, Luke Kennard made all his three-pointers on the Grizzlies. Like, if Luke Kennard regresses to shooting, 45% on three-pointers, which is an elite number, instead of 54%, which is what he shot on the Grizzlies last year, well, then a lot of those positive lineup numbers will regress a little bit. I mean, personally, I'd be surprised if his three-point percentage stayed over 50%, but I, of course, would love to be wrong. But we're about to see some new Grizzlies lineups. Like, no matter how you cut it, the lineups used in the first 25 games are going to be lineups we've never seen before. 5-man lineups we've never seen before. It's either lineups that were not emphasized or were not played that frequently last year, and then it's going to be all new ones as Marcus Smart becomes a crucial member of this team. And then, like, what's Derrick Rose going to do? What's one of the young guys going to do? Is Zaire Williams going to bounce back? And then, of course, we'll get Steven Adams, hopefully healthy. Jaren back to his all-star level, and the Grizzlies will hit the ground running not very long from now. Well, anyways, that is the episode for today. Thanks for listening. If you want to play fantasy basketball with me, I do that with my Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. Also, if you sign up for my Patreon, you can join the Slack channel with the listeners. There is a Grits and Grinds Slack channel over there. So if you want to ask me Grizzlies questions through that Slack any time of day or night, you can join my Patreon, patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. Remember to try out Underdog Fantasy. Use that promo code FBBF or click the link in this episode's description. If you're listening to the audio version of this show, hey, go check this out on YouTube and subscribe to the Grits and Grinds YouTube channel. All right. Hope you guys are having a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Go Grizz.